Hi guys, welcome to this tutorial. Today I'm going to be looking at inspector calls again, and I'm going to be looking at the way that Priestley uses the inspector. I've had a couple of people in the comments section asking me to do a video on this, so I thought I would. And what I've done today is I've typed it up just so that it can be a bit clearer for you reading it rather than my terrible handwriting. And yeah, so that's what I've done. So in terms of the inspector as a question, it's a really interesting question to try and get because he's such a complex character, and there's so many layers of ambiguity to the inspector. It makes it, I think, quite a tricky character question to get, but be that as it may, I would approach my planning in the same way as I always do, which is to think about the beginning, middle and end, and think about character to development. So regardless of whether I got a character or a theme, I would approach this in the same way. I would just plot out at the start my ideas. What sorts of things would I want to talk about? It might not be that I use all of this, but I think it's in your exam, it's a good 5 minutes well spent just to plot out, get your ideas, get any quotes down that you think could be useful. And so you can just have a look at that there. I don't need to talk you through that. So I'm going to talk you through, would be, I'd give myself full marks for this. So you're looking here at a grade 9 response to a question about the ways in which Priestley uses the inspector. So as I've talked about before, I always try and start with something, I call them a thesis kind of statement to begin with, and I'm focusing on Priestley using, so I just want to get in at the start there, this idea of the writer at work. So, and as I've talked about a number of times, I try and, within my thesis, try and get a kind of list of 3 in there. It just looks impressive to do that. So Priestley uses the mysterious, impressive, unrelenting character of the inspector to shine a light on the hypocrisy and toxic private lives of the seemingly respectable and upper class members of society. From his arrival and even after his dramatic departure, Gould's impact has ripped the Burling family apart, exposing their flaws, their ego and their entitlement. So you can see I've got a kind of another list of 3. Now I do think that when you've got the time for a literature essay, you've got a full sort of 45-50 minutes to do this question. I think it's worth spending a bit of time just having almost a sort of a mini intro. In the case of mine, there's lots of evaluation in there. I'm thinking about the character as a whole, its function, and how and why it's been used. So I'm then sort of thinking about, I'm going to go through the character in terms of chronologically, thinking about the way that he's presented from the sort of start. So before audiences meet Gould, his arrival has announced the family. Prior to his entrance into the room, Mr. Burling states, give us some more light. The simple imperative across light takes on deep levels of irony. Soon Gould will provide metaphorical light truth to the Burlings, something they will greet with horror, and in the case of older characters, fury. Indeed, the increased light serves as a dramatic device and helps to introduce the illuminating power of the inspector. So I've got this idea of sort of the drama of it, the idea of, before he even enters, this idea of it being a dramatic device. And so there's lots here in terms of Priestley's craft. So, the use of it being an imperative, the idea of metaphor. So I'm thinking about even before the inspector's on the stage, the idea of, I've latched onto one simple quote, give us some more light, but made quite an elaborate point there. And I've got some analysis here about his importance and impact. And then I'm going to think, really want to get you focusing on the idea of stagecraft. So then I'm going to focus on the use of the stage directions, those introductory ones, to look at the inspector. And so this idea that they indicate it's not important the inspector to be big, but that he creates an impression of massiveness, solidity and purposefulness. So I've got evidence. Obviously you are not going to have the player in front of you, but I think it's really important to remember for each character, if you can, at least a couple of quotes or stage directions. So I've got this, what I've chosen as quite an important stage direction about, or information about him. So then I've got methods here. This list of 3 is interesting because it focuses on almost indefinable presence, a slightly mystical aura which gives him authority. Possibly, those of you who've seen my videos know how much I enjoy my 3 Ps, my possibly, potentially, perhaps. And focusing here about Priestley wants to reiterate it's not superficial elements such as size or wealth that give people power. So I've got this real sense of the writer's purpose, their intent, why they've done something here. It's the quality of their character. The noun purposefulness really helps to establish the sense he's focused, dedicated to unearthing the information he is demanding. So we've got more methods here and analysis of that. This sense of authority is built upon immediately. The stage directions demonstrate his unwillingness to be intimidated by the bragging, posturing behaviour of Mr. Burling. We're told that he interrupts, cutting in massively, and he also adopts blunt, graphic language when describing Eva's death. He tells the family she died in agony. The cause of death was suicide, of course. His approach is viewed as distasteful and upsetting by the family, shining a light on the hypocrisy of people who treat girls like Eva as though they are worthless trash, yet recoil when faced with the consequence of those same actions. So hopefully you can see in this there's a real sense of interwoven evidence, analysis, and that key skill at grade 9, which is around the evaluation. So I'm just going to highlight in this paragraph some of my evaluative language here. Worthless trash and hypocrisy. So I've incorporated, you know, quite a lot of evaluation around the effects of this. Okay. And you can see that I'm going through chronologically from, you know, before he was on the stage to the opening stage directions that focus on him, and then how that's immediately built on. Okay. So into Act 2, so you can see building on that sense of chronology, the inspector continues to dominate the action. I'm really focusing on this idea of the drama and the performance of it. Priestley adopts a blunt, interrogative tone. So again, this is my sort of evaluative words I use, whereby Gould continually asks the Burlings and Gerald about their actions. When they are evasive, he repeats his questions, and as Sheila points out in the final months of the play, it seems that he already knows the answers. Priestley shrouds the inspector in mystery. We're not given a sense of how he would know such details as Eva feeling lonely or desperate. These statements seem to suggest an intimate knowledge of Eva's state of mind, something which would be unlikely so early on in an investigation. So there's my sense of sort of interpretation and analysis around this character here. Inspector's detailed and unwavering knowledge of the chain of events, really nice if you can to get embedded quotes in. Leaves audiences wondering whether the inspector is even real or whether he's a supernatural manifestation of their guilt and conscience. Perhaps, possibly, potentially perhaps, the Burlings, like Scrooge before them, are being haunted by the spectres of the past. Now, I would just say that there's no requirement for you to make those links or allusions to other literary texts. To me, it's just around that AO1, which is your sort of expression and your maturity as a writer. At that top grade, making a little allusion like that, I just think is quite nice. It shows a deep kind of literary understanding of the way in which the character could be used. So within his interrogation, Priestley uses blunt dialogue. Notice that I sort of am repeatedly focusing on Priestley doing things, Priestley including things. Now I could have just said Priestley uses the dialogue. By my sort of using blunt here, this is just me evaluating, it's my take on it. I think that dialogue is quite direct or quite forceful, and either of those adjectives would have worked well there as well. Gould tells Mrs. Burling, you slammed the door in her face and you did something terribly wrong. So again, we've got more evidence. For characters such as the Burlings, being held to account was an uncomfortable situation, and then we've got some context coming in here. Look, Priestley's strong political beliefs with regards to toxic nature of capitalism means his contempt towards the rich arrogance is thinly veiled here. Through his use of the inspector, Priestley seemingly holds these characters and all of society to account for its actions. So again, there's more interpretation here around Priestley and his purpose. As the action moves towards its denouement, so its sort of resolution, so I'm thinking here about the structure of the whole play, Inspector unleashes a biting monologue. This is another example of my evaluation. And here we've got, again, sort of a structural point upon the bickering-stricken family. He tells them they all helped kill Eva before reminding them there are millions of Eva Smiths, embedded quotes all the way here. He tries to reiterate a sense of responsibility and accountability, telling them we're all part of one body. And it's fine here within your writing to kind of paraphrase, particularly if you can't remember full quotes, but just to kind of incorporate them in your own way, in a final and passionate attempt to bring them into a state of collective humanity. Finally, family is silenced, and as audiences, we hope his message has sunk in. After his emotive speech, the inspector quickly leaves, helping audiences to focus on the fallout of his words. So I'm constantly thinking here about, you know, how we are responding as an audience, the effects on us, how we think, feel, respond. And then again, more evaluation here. It's my take, my feelings here towards it. Sadly and perhaps inevitably, the older and less impressionable Burlings and Gerald quickly try to abnegate, get rid of responsibility as they scrabble to challenge the authority of the inspector. Soon Mr. Burling is mimicking the inspector. That's a good stage direction I like to use. Joking, you all helped kill her. After contacting both police and infirmary, he concludes there's no Inspector Gould and unbelievably seems quickly able to move on from terrible revelations he's heard. Priestley does, however, offer audiences some hope. Through the traumatised and altered beliefs of both Eric and Sheila, Priestley demonstrates that the inspector's visit has had real and hopefully lasting impact upon a younger generation who, he hopes, are more willing to change. So again, this focus on Priestley's purpose, his craft, what he's done, how are we responding to that? Okay, moving on to my final paragraph on this. Before the cliffhanger ending, so that again, just getting in some structured terminology, audiences are left baffled. Was Gould real? If he isn't a policeman, then were the events of the entire drama a mere hoax? There's a real sense of confusion, which interestingly is only intensified by the final stage directions, the phone ringing, and the revelation that a girl has died and a policeman's on his way to speak to the family. I'm just showing excellent sort of knowledge here of the play. The family's response, one of guilt and dumbfounded shock, is startling and satisfying. So I've got some evaluation here, and that evaluation is interwoven with the idea of effects on the audiences. So Mr. Burling's delight in evading repercussions feels hollow. We're left to hope that he will now face the consequences of his selfish behaviour. As audiences, we are left uncertain as to Gould's identity. Was he a ghostly vision of the future? Was he a friend of Eva, someone hoaxing the family? We don't know, but what we do know is that the inspector's impact on the family is enormous. Indeed, as he says, public men, Mr. Burling, have responsibilities as well as privileges. I quite like in an essay, particularly a character-based essay, to sort of end on something significant or poignant or just important that that character might have said. Indeed, as he says, blah, 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 helping this self-entitled, reckless family see the error of their ways was the inspector's responsibility, and he accomplished this in a flawless manner. So just this idea of, it's very small, it's a very mini kind of conclusion, but I think, again, in the time you've got with the literature essay, it's important to try and round off your ideas and to make a kind of overall or overarching comment about that character and perhaps its significance in the sort of text as a whole. Okay, thanks for watching. Hope that was useful.